I'm 68 years old, and for the last 15 years, I've been carrying a secret that would make most people think I've lost my mind. In 1989, I found 4 newborn creatures in the woods behind my property. They weren't bears, they weren't wolves, they were something else entirely. Something that walked on 2 legs, spoke in fragmented sentences, and demonstrated intelligence that challenged everything I thought I knew about the natural world. I raised them like they were my own children. For 15 years, we lived in an impossible peace that taught me more about consciousness, communication, and connection than 3 decades as a wildlife biologist ever could. And then, in 2004, they chose to leave. What I learned during those years would revolutionize our understanding of evolution, intelligence, and what it means to be human. I have the journals documenting every discovery. I have photographs hidden in my cabin. I have DNA results that prove I'm not insane. This is my confession before I die. My name is Thomas Calder. I'm 68 years old, dying of stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave me 6 months last April. It's November now, so I'm on borrowed time. I spent 34 years as a wildlife biologist, most of that time working for the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. I've tracked wolves, studied elk migration patterns, helped reintroduce native species to compromised ecosystems. I thought I understood the natural world. I thought I'd categorized the limits of what intelligence looked like in non-human species. I was catastrophically wrong, and I'm grateful for it. In 1987, my father killed himself in the barn behind his house in Traverse City. Depression, the doctors said, though he'd never been diagnosed. I inherited some money, not much, but enough. By then, I was 35, divorced once already, no kids, nothing tying me to the suburbs where I'd been living. I bought 200 acres of remote forest land in the Upper Peninsula, 8 miles from the nearest paved road. Built a icy cabin myself over 2 summers. The isolation felt like medicine back then. I told myself I needed the quiet to focus on my research. That was partly true. Mostly I just wanted to be alone, away from questions I couldn't answer about my father, about my failed marriage, about why I felt more comfortable observing animals than connecting with people. The property had everything I needed: fresh water from a creek that ran year-round, enough timber to heat the cabin, and deer populations thick enough that I never had to drive to town for meat. For 2 years, it was exactly what I needed. I'd wake before dawn, check trail cameras, document animal movements, compile data for papers I told myself I'd publish someday. Evenings, I'd sit on my porch and watch the forest settle into darkness, listening to the complex symphony of wildlife that most people never hear. I believed I understood the limits of what lived in those woods. I believed nature, while complex, was ultimately knowable within established parameters. What I found in October 1989 shattered every assumption I'd built my career on. And over the next 15 years, 4 impossible creatures would teach me that intelligence, consciousness, and family extend far beyond the boundaries we've drawn around humanity. October 12, 1989. The date is burned into my memory. It was a Thursday, unseasonably cold for mid-October. Temperature at dawn was 34 degrees Fahrenheit, freezing rain mixed with sleet. I'd gone out early to check a trail camera I'd mounted near a limestone outcropping about 5 miles from my cabin. The area was remote even by my standards. No trails, no markers, just dense forest and broken rock formations. I heard them before I saw them, a sound like nothing I'd encountered in 12 years of field biology. Not crying exactly, but close, high-pitched, desperate, distinctly mammalian, but structured in ways that suggested complex distress signaling rather than simple pain response. I followed the sound to a crude shelter wedged into a crevice in the limestone. Inside were 4 newborn creatures, each about the size of a small cat, covered in matted dark gray fur. My brain immediately tried to categorize them: wolf pups with deformities, bear cubs with unusual proportions. But the wrongness was immediate and unmistakable. The hind legs were too long, too thick, built for upright bipedal movement. The front limbs had elongated digits, 5 of them with opposable thumbs, clearly visible even on these newborns. Their tiny hands gripped at the air with intention, with purpose, reaching for warmth in coordinated movements that exceeded anything I'd seen in young mammals. Around the shelter, pressed deep into the mud and old snow, were tracks that made my professional training collide with impossible reality. 18 inches long, 7 inches wide at the heel, with distinct claw marks extending beyond toe pads. The stride length between prints measured approximately 6 feet. Whatever had made these tracks walked upright habitually and weighed at least 300 pounds. An adult, a mother presumably, and she was gone. I knelt there in the freezing rain, watching these newborns slowly dying of hypothermia, and made a choice that would define the rest of my life. Not out of scientific curiosity alone, though that was part of it. Not out of compassion alone, though I felt that too. But out of a sudden, overwhelming certainty that I was witnessing something extraordinary, something that deserved a chance to survive, to teach me what they were, to bridge a gap I hadn't known existed. I wrapped all 4 of them in my jacket and carried them home through 5 miles of freezing rain, feeling their tiny hearts beating against my chest, already wondering what impossible journey I'd just begun. That first night I didn't sleep. I'd created a makeshift kennel in my mudroom using wire fencing and heat lamps, maintaining temperature around 80 degrees. The creatures, I didn't know what else to call them, huddled together for warmth, their tiny bodies pressed against each other in ways that suggested social bonding from birth. Feeding them was my first real challenge and my first revelation. I tried heated milk mixed with raw egg using an eyedropper, the same method I'd used for orphaned raccoons. They ate hungrily, but what struck me immediately was their grip. Those tiny fingers wrapped around the dropper with deliberate precision, adjusting pressure, angling for better access. No wolf pup, no bear cub possessed that level of fine motor control at this age. By the 3rd day, their eyes opened, amber-colored, bright and impossibly alert, tracking my movements with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. These weren't animal eyes responding to motion and threat. There was evaluation behind them. Assessment. These newborns were studying me as intently as I was studying them. I named them on the 4th day: Rook, Cal, Sam, and Micah. Scientific detachment. Demanded I number them, catalog them clinically. But something in the way they responded to my voice, the way they seemed to differentiate my tones and inflections, made naming feel necessary, essential even, and they learned their names. Within a week, when I called Rook, his ears would swivel toward me before the others reacted. Cal would trigger a specific head turn from the smallest of the 4. This wasn't classical conditioning. The response was too immediate, too contextual. They were processing language. The anatomical details became clearer as they grew. The skull structure was extraordinary. Canine-shaped, yes, but with a shortened muzzle and domed cranium that suggested brain volume approaching primate ranges. The ears were pointed and mobile, swiveling independently to track multiple sound sources simultaneously. Their hands developed rapidly, showing tactile sensitivity in the finger pads that exceeded most primates I'd studied. By the end of the 1st week, they'd doubled in size. By 2 weeks, they could stand on their hind legs for extended periods, balancing with a grace that wolves couldn't achieve even as adults. Their teeth came in around day 14, sharp carnivorous teeth, yes, but with variations in the molars that suggested omnivorous capability. What struck me most during those early weeks was their communication with each other. The vocalizations weren't random. They carried structure, rhythm, intentional variation. When one would cry out, the others would respond with specific sound patterns that changed based on context. Hungry? One pattern. Cold? Another. Seeking contact? A third, distinctly different vocalization. I was watching language develop in real time, not human language, but something structured and sophisticated nonetheless. Every day I told myself I should report this discovery. Every day I found reasons to wait. Just one more week of observations. Just until I understood them better. But the truth was simpler. I was already attached, already thinking of them as family, already understanding that whatever happened next, my life had fundamentally changed. The first year was a cascade of discoveries that challenged everything I thought I knew about intelligence and development. By 3 months, they weighed 40 pounds each and demonstrated problem-solving abilities that shouldn't have been possible at their age. I watched Rook figure out how to open a complex latch one morning, not through trial and error, but through observation and systematic testing. He studied the mechanism, identified the leverage point, and manipulated it with those remarkable hands until it released. The entire process took less than 5 minutes. Then he showed the others how he'd done it. That detail, the teaching, was what convinced me these weren't simply intelligent animals. Rook had learned something, then deliberately demonstrated it to his siblings. That's cultural transmission. That's pedagogy. That's a hallmark of human-level cognition. Cal developed differently. He was more observational, more patient. I'd catch him watching me for hours, studying how I moved, how I performed tasks, how I organized my environment. Then he'd replicate those behaviors. I saw him stack firewood one afternoon, mimicking the pattern I'd used that morning. The pieces weren't perfectly aligned, but the intent was unmistakable. He was learning through observation and imitation at a level that exceeded even great apes. Sam was the explorer. By 6 months, he'd investigated every corner of their expanding enclosure, tested every boundary, mapped every exit route. But his testing wasn't destructive. It was methodical, scientific almost. He'd apply pressure to different points on a fence panel, seemingly cataloging which points were strongest, which were vulnerable. He was studying the physics of his confinement. Micah was my greatest mystery and my deepest connection. Quieter than the others? More. Reserved, but with an awareness that sometimes felt supernatural. He'd react to my intentions before I'd moved, as if reading micro-expressions or body language at a level I couldn't consciously perceive. When I was sad, and I was often sad during those early months, processing my father's death, my isolation, Micah would stay close, not demanding attention, just present, offering comfort across species boundaries. By their first birthday in October 1990, they'd reached impressive size. Rook and Cal stood roughly 6 feet tall upright, each weighing approximately 200 pounds. Sam and Micah were slightly smaller, maybe 5'8", 175 pounds. Their strength was extraordinary, but what fascinated me more was their restraint. They could have easily destroyed their enclosure, but they didn't. They understood boundaries, not as limitations to fight against, but as social contracts to respect. Their vocal development accelerated dramatically around month 9. The sounds became more complex, more varied, carrying what I can only describe as grammatical structure. Specific sound combinations would consistently precede specific actions. A particular low rumble always meant, "I'm hungry." A higher-pitched warble meant, "Come here." A sharp bark meant, "Danger" or "Alert." I started responding to their vocalizations as if they were language, narrating my responses. "Yes, Rook, I know you're hungry. Food is coming." Over time, they began associating my words with actions, building a bridge between their communication system and mine. The forest around my property changed that first year. Deer trails shifted away from areas near my cabin, but not in fear, in respect. I noticed the deer weren't vanishing. They were establishing new patterns that avoided direct conflict with what they sensed was an apex presence. The ecosystem was adapting, rebalancing, accommodating something new. My social life continued its decline, but I'd stopped caring. How could normal conversation about sports or weather compare to watching four impossible beings develop consciousness before my eyes? I was learning things no human had ever documented. I was building relationships across evolutionary boundaries. The isolation that had felt like exile was now precious solitude protecting something extraordinary. Year 2 brought the breakthrough that still gives me chills when I remember it. Rook spoke his first recognizable word. It was March 1991, early evening. I was preparing their dinner. They were eating about 10 pounds of meat per day now, supplemented with vegetables I'd introduced experimentally. Rook was watching me as always, those amber eyes tracking every movement. "Food," I said, as I did every evening. "Dinner time." "Pho," Rook responded. I froze, dropped the knife I'd been using to cut meat, turned to face him fully. "Did you just—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "Pho," he repeated, more clearly this time. His mouth structure wasn't designed for human phonemes, but he was attempting them. Deliberately, intentionally. Over the next 6 months, their vocabulary expanded slowly, but undeniably. Food became clearer. Yes and no emerged, though no was easier, the sound closer to their natural vocalizations. Rook, Cal, Sam, Micah. They learned to identify themselves and each other with approximations of the names I'd given them. Cal mastered hungry and cold. Sam learned out and want. Micah, true to his nature, focused on emotional communication. Good, sad, a sound that meant something close to together. I documented everything obsessively. The journals from this period read like linguistic field notes, tracking phoneme development, grammatical structures, semantic ranges. What I was witnessing was language acquisition in a non-human species with no evolutionary pressure toward human-compatible speech. They were learning because they wanted to communicate with me, because they valued our relationship, enough to bridge the gap. The implications were staggering. For decades, linguists had argued about whether language was uniquely human, whether the capacity for complex grammar required specific evolutionary adaptations. Here was evidence that intelligence, given sufficient motivation and social context, could develop language regardless of biological constraints. But beyond the scientific implications, what moved me was the why. They weren't learning words because I was training them with rewards. They were learning because they cared about being understood, because they viewed me as family and wanted deeper connection. Year 3 brought increased sophistication. They began combining words. Want food? Rook hungry? Go out? The syntax was simple, but it was syntax. Subject-verb constructions. Questions indicated by rising intonation. This wasn't mimicry, this was grammar. I started teaching them more complex concepts. Colors, difficult because their color perception differed from humans. Numbers, easier, surprisingly. I could show them 3 pieces of meat and say 3, and they'd grasp the quantity concept within weeks. Time concepts were harder. Tomorrow and yesterday remained abstract. They lived intensely in the present, with planning capability that extended hours, maybe a day ahead, but not much further. Their social structure deepened fascinatingly. Rook was the clear leader, but his leadership wasn't maintained through violence, it was earned through intelligence and decision-making. When conflicts arose, he'd position himself between combatants and vocalize specific patterns that the others respected. He was mediating, negotiating, operating as an authority figure in ways that suggested sophisticated social cognition. Cal became the primary communicator with me. He'd translate, essentially, when the others struggled with human words. If Sam wanted something but couldn't articulate it, Cal would vocalize on his behalf. He was serving as an interpreter between their native communication system and the human language they were learning. My health was holding steady, but my life outside the property had become virtually non-existent. I was 39 years old with no friends, no romantic relationships, no social connections beyond necessary interactions in town. People in the DNR office had stopped asking about my personal life. I'd become that weird hermit biologist who kept to himself. But I wasn't lonely. Every evening I'd sit with 4 impossible beings who were teaching me as much as I was teaching them. We'd talk, their broken English mixed with my attempts at their vocalizations, creating a pidgin language that existed nowhere else on Earth. Those conversations, halting and limited as they were, meant more to me than any human interaction I'd had in years. By year 4, they'd reached full physical maturity. Rook stood nearly 8 feet tall, weighing approximately 350 pounds. Cal was slightly smaller, maybe 7'6", 300 pounds. Sam and Micah had topped out around 7 feet, 275 pounds each. Their strength was extraordinary. I watched Cal casually move a fallen log that would have required 3 men and mechanical assistance. But what fascinated me during this period wasn't their physical capability. It was their cultural development. They'd created their own traditions. Every full moon, they'd gather in a specific clearing about half a mile from my cabin and vocalize together in complex harmonies. I followed them once, stayed hidden, watched and recorded. The sounds were hauntingly beautiful, structured like music, with rhythms and progressions that suggested aesthetic intention, not just communication. They were singing. When I asked Cal about it later, he struggled to explain. Moon, good, together, sing, old, before. Before what? I pressed. His response chilled me. Before Rook, before Cal, before here. Before they were born, he was describing an inherited behavior, something they knew instinctively, passed down through generations of their species. They carried cultural memory. That year, I collected blood samples during a minor injury Sam sustained. I sent them to 3 different laboratories under false pretenses, bracing myself for results I knew would be impossible. The genetic analysis confirmed what I'd suspected. 60% Hockanus lupus. DNA, 25% great ape markers, closest to bonobo, and 15% unknown genetic material that didn't match anything in existing databases. The chromosome count was 46, identical to humans, impossible for a wolf-ape hybrid. When the 3rd lab's senior geneticist called me at 2 a.m., his voice was shaking. Mr. Calder, based on genetic diversity markers, I'd estimate a founding population of at least 500 individuals, establishing themselves somewhere between 10,000 and 50,000 years ago. This isn't a hybrid. This is a separate species that's been breeding true for millennia. Where did you find this sample? I never answered his follow-up calls. A separate species, ancient, stable, intelligent enough to develop language and culture, and I had 4 of them living on my property, teaching me their songs, learning my words, building a relationship that transcended every boundary I'd been taught to believe separated human from animal. Year 5 brought tool use. I'd seen them manipulate objects before, but this was different. Sam fashioned a stick into a probe to extract honey from a beehive, modifying it with his teeth until it fit perfectly into the hive's entrance. Rook created a simple lever system to move a heavy water container, positioning a rock as a fulcrum with clear understanding of mechanical advantage. These weren't instinctive behaviors. These were innovations. Problem-solving using physics and planning. When I praised Rook for the lever system, he responded with obvious pride. Smart, he said, pointing to his own head. Rook, smart. He had self-awareness, metacognition, the ability to recognize his own intelligence as a trait worthy of pride. Year 6 brought my greatest challenge and my deepest ethical crisis. Cal approached me one evening with unusual agitation. More, he said. Want more? More what? More food? He shook his head in frustration, a gesture he'd learned from me. More Rook, more Cal, more same. He was asking about others of his kind, about mates, about reproduction. I'd known this was coming. They were fully mature, genetically programmed to seek reproduction. But I had no way to provide what they needed. I didn't know if others existed, didn't know where the mother who'd birthed them had gone, couldn't provide the basic biological imperative that drove every species. I don't know where to find more, I told him honestly. I'm sorry. Cal's response broke my heart. Sad. Cal, sad, want family. We are family, I said. Different family, he clarified. And he was right. I could never be what they needed. Not completely. I was a bridge, a companion, a father figure perhaps, but not their species, not their true family. The middle years brought a deepening that transcended language. We developed a communication system that blended their vocalizations, my words, gesture, and what I can only describe as intuitive understanding. Entire conversations happened with minimal speech, through body language and shared context built over years of constant interaction. Micah became my closest confidant. His language skills never matched Cal's, but his emotional intelligence exceeded all the others. He could read my moods with uncanny accuracy. When I received news that my ex-wife had died in a car accident, we'd had no contact in years, but the news still hit hard. Micah stayed with me for 3 days, just present, occasionally touching my shoulder with one massive hand, offering wordless comfort that meant more than any human condolence could have. Year 8 brought unexpected visitors. A documentary crew arrived in the area investigating reports of unusual tracks and predation patterns. They set up trail cameras within 3 miles of my property. For 6 weeks, I lived in constant anxiety that Rook or the others would be caught on film. But they weren't, and watching how they avoided detection taught me something profound about their intelligence. They understood cameras, understood what they meant. Rook found one of the trail cameras during a ranging expedition and brought it back to show me. "Watch," he said. "Human, watch?" "Yes," I confirmed. "Humans trying to see you." He gestured to himself and his brothers. "See bad?" "Very bad. Humans would hurt you, take you away." Rook's eyes narrowed in understanding. For the next 6 weeks, all 4 of them modified their ranging patterns to avoid every camera location. They'd identified all of them, more than a dozen scattered across miles of forest, and simply moved around them. The documentary crew eventually left, finding nothing conclusive, never knowing how close they'd come. That incident reinforced what I'd suspected for years. They weren't surviving through instinct or luck. They were surviving through intelligence that exceeded most humans. They understood technology, understood human behavior, understood the threat we posed. Their species had remained hidden for millennia, not because they were rare or reclusive by nature, but because they were smart enough to avoid discovery. Year 9 brought teaching that reversed our traditional roles. Cal started showing me tracking techniques that exceeded anything I'd learned in 20 years of field biology. How to read disturbances in leaf litter that I'd previously missed. How to differentiate between tracks from the same species but different emotional states. A calm deer moves differently than a nervous one. How to predict animal movement based on wind patterns and scent dispersal. He was teaching me to sense the forest as they did, to read the environment through multiple simultaneous inputs, visual, olfactory, auditory, even tactile information from air pressure changes. Humans rely so heavily on vision that we're functionally blind to 90% of environmental information. Cal was opening my senses to that hidden 90%. Forest, talk, he explained one afternoon. Always talking. Thomas, not listen. He was right. I'd spent my entire career observing nature from the outside. They lived inside it, part of the conversation rather than mere observers. Year 10 brought the conversation that still haunts me with its profundity. Micah and I were sitting on my porch at sunset, watching the forest settle into evening. He'd been unusually quiet all day. Finally, he spoke. "Thomas? Die?" I understood what he was asking. At 47, I was showing age in ways they weren't. Gray in my hair, arthritis starting in my joints, the physical limitations of human aging that they'd noticed. "Yes," I answered honestly. "Someday, all humans die." "Micah, die?" "Yes, all living things die eventually." Long silence, then, "Sad. Don't want Thomas die." "I don't want to die either, but that's how life works." Another pause. "Thomas, old. Micah, old?" "Yes, you're 10 years old now?" "How old, Thomas?" 47. He processed this. "Thomas, more old." "Yes." "Thomas, die? Before Micah?" The question pierced me. "Probably yes. Humans usually don't live as long as your kind." I didn't actually know their lifespan, had no data, but based on their development rate and physical maturity, I suspected they'd outlive me by decades. When Thomas die, Micah struggled with the concept. "Micah? Alone?" "You'll have Rook and Cal and Sam. You'll always have your brothers." "Different," he insisted. "Thomas. Family different. Thomas. Teach. Thomas. Love." I was crying. I'm not ashamed to admit it. This massive intelligent being was confronting mortality and expressing love in broken English that hit harder than poetry. "I love you too, Micah. All of you. You're my family." He leaned against me, carefully, always aware of his strength. "Family? Forever?" "Forever," I promised. "Even after I die, you'll remember me, and I'll remember you wherever I go next." He seemed satisfied with that. We sat in silence until the stars came out, and I understood that this being, this creature that shouldn't exist according to everything science knew, possessed a soul as deep and real as any human's. The later years brought subtle shifts that I didn't recognize as preparation at the time. Their ranging expeditions extended longer, 3 days, then 5, then a week. They always returned, always checked in, but the forest was calling them in ways my property couldn't satisfy. Year 11 brought evidence of others. Rook returned from a 2-week expedition with excitement I'd rarely seen. "Found," he said. "Found tracks." "What kind of tracks?" "Same. Rook, big, old." He gestured to convey size and maturity. "Other there." My heart raced. "You saw another one, like you?" "No, see, tracks, smell, old, gone, but there." He was confirming what I'd always suspected. They weren't alone. A breeding population existed somewhere in these vast forests. Over the next 2 years, they found more evidence, tracks, scent markings, territorial boundaries that suggested at least a small population within a 100-mile radius. Cal found a shelter similar to the one I'd discovered them in, crude but intentional, showing construction knowledge. "Want? Find," Sam told me during year 12. "Want, see, others." "I know," I said. "You should find them. Find your own kind." "Leave Thomas?" Micah asked, anxiety clear in his voice. This was the conversation I'd been dreading for years. "You don't have to leave forever, but you should meet others, find mates, have families." "Thomas, family," Rook insisted. "Yes, always. But you need more than me. You need what I can't give you." The truth settled over all of us. They were 12 years old, fully mature, living a half-life confined to my property when they should be ranging across hundreds of miles, establishing territories, finding mates, fulfilling biological imperatives I couldn't provide for. I was holding them back, my love, my fear of losing them, my desire to protect them. It had become a cage as real as any fence. Year 13 brought increased tension, not between us, between them and the constraints of our situation. Sam became irritable. Cal spent weeks away at a time. Rook struggled visibly with his role as leader of a pack that had nowhere to lead. Micah alone seemed content to stay, but even he would stare into the forest with longing I couldn't miss. I made the decision that broke my heart, but honored what I'd learned. I would let them go. Not force them, not abandon them, but release them from any obligation to stay. Give them permission to choose their own path. In January 2004, I called them together. All four gathered in the main enclosure I'd built years ago, now more symbolic than functional. They could leave whenever they wanted. They stayed because they chose to. "I need to tell you something," I began. "You're free. You've always been free, but I'm saying it now clearly. You can leave. You should leave. Find others of your kind. Build the lives you're meant to have." Silence. 4 sets of amber eyes studying me with intelligence that still took my breath away. "Thomas, want go?" Micah asked. "No, I never want you to go, but what I want doesn't matter. You need more than this property, more than me." "Where go?" Cal asked practically. "Wherever you find the others, wherever you find tracks and scent and evidence. North, maybe? Deeper wilderness." Rook spoke carefully. "Go? Come back?" "Always. This is your home. Always. But you can also have more home, bigger territory. Other family." "Two? Family?" Sam clarified. "Yes, me here, others out there, both family." They processed this, discussed among themselves in their native vocalizations, complex harmonics I'd never fully decoded. Finally, Rook spoke for all of them. "Try, go, find, come back, tell Thomas." "Perfect," I said, crying again. "That's perfect." The last 2 years were different, but not diminished. They'd leave for weeks, sometimes months, but they always returned. And when they did, they'd tell me what they'd found. Rook had found others. A small group, maybe 15 individuals, ranging across northern territories. They'd accepted him cautiously at first, but his intelligence and size had earned respect. He'd found a mate. Her name, translated as best he could, was something close to Mira. Cal had established his own territory between mine and the northern group, serving as a bridge. He visited most frequently, maintaining our relationship while building his own life. Sam had ranged farthest, finding evidence of groups as far as the Canadian border. He was the explorer still, mapping a world I'd never see. Micah stayed closest. He'd found a mate. He called her Lynn, but brought her to my property. Introduced us. The moment was surreal. Me, a 53-year-old human biologist, meeting a female dogman who regarded me with cautious curiosity because her mate trusted me. "Thomas, good," Micah told her in their language. "Thomas, family." Lynn touched my shoulder gently, the same gesture of trust and affection Micah had shown me for years. She accepted me because he vouched for me. I'd earned a place in their social structure that transcended species. That year, Micah and Lynn had pups, 2 of them, born in a shelter they'd built half a mile from my cabin. Micah brought them to meet me when they were 3 weeks old. I knelt in the forest, watching 2 tiny beings, grandchildren in a way, and remembered finding 4 helpless newborns in a limestone outcropping 15 years earlier, the circle completing itself. "They're beautiful," I told Micah. "Want Thomas teach?" he asked. Like Thomas teach Micah? He was asking me to help raise them, to pass on what I'd learned, to be grandfather to the next generation. "I'd be honored," I said. Those final 2 years, I had the extraordinary privilege of teaching 2 more of their kind while learning from the adults they'd become. Rook would visit and discuss territorial management, actual discussions about ranges and boundaries, and conflict resolution with other groups. Cal taught me about their culture, their traditions, the songs and rituals that went back further than history. Sam shared discoveries from his explorations, evidence that their species ranged across vast territories, staying hidden through intelligence and coordination that exceeded human capabilities. It's November 2024 now, 20 years since those final integrated years, 35 years since I found 4 helpless newborns and made the choice that defined my life. Micah still visits. He's 35 years old now, graying at the muzzle, moving with the careful deliberation of middle age. His pups, adults now themselves with pups of their own, sometimes accompany him. 3 generations of impossible beings who treat my property as sacred ground because their father, grandfather, and great-grandfather do. Rook died 5 years ago, killed defending his territory from a rival male, according to Cal. He was 30. I grieved like I'd lost a son. Because I had. Cal visits monthly. He's become something like an ambassador between their groups and my isolated human presence. He brings news, shares stories, maintains the bridge we built over 15 years of daily contact. Sam, I haven't seen in 7 years. Cal tells me he's alive, thriving, possibly leading a large group in Northern Territories. Too far to visit regularly, but the connection remains. I'm dying now. The cancer is advancing faster than the doctors predicted. Maybe weeks left, not months. Micah knows. He's been staying close, the same way he stayed close when I grieved my ex-wife's death all those years ago. Yesterday, he brought his eldest son. I call him Ash, the closest English sound to his actual name. Ash is 19 years old, fully mature, intelligent, and articulate beyond what Micah was at that age. Each generation seems to develop faster, learn deeper. Ash must stay, Micah told me. When Thomas, die. Ash, remember? Tell others. He was assigning his son to memorialize me, to carry my story into their oral history. I would become part of their culture, the strange human who raised 4 of their kind and loved them enough to let them go. In 34 years as a wildlife biologist, I learned to observe, categorize, and understand animal behavior within established frameworks. In 15 years with Rook, Cal, Sam, and Micah, I learned that those frameworks are catastrophically incomplete. Intelligence isn't binary, human, or animal. It's a spectrum, and we share that spectrum with beings we don't acknowledge, because acknowledging them would shatter our sense of uniqueness. Language isn't uniquely human. Culture isn't uniquely human. Love, grief, humor, aesthetic appreciation, moral reasoning, none of it is uniquely human. We just convinced ourselves it was because it made dominion easier to justify. These beings, DOGMEN if you need a label, possess intelligence that rivals and in some ways exceeds ours. They've remained hidden not through camouflage or rarity, but through sophisticated understanding of human behavior and coordinated cultural resistance to discovery. They know we're dangerous. They know revelation would mean capture, study, exploitation, so they stay invisible, managing their populations and territories with planning that extends across generations. The DNA analysis proved they're ancient, a stable species that's been breeding true for at least 10,000 years, possibly 50,000. They're not cryptids or anomalies. They're an intelligent species, sharing our forests, adapting to our expansion by becoming more careful, more coordinated, more deliberate in their concealment. What I learned about communication transcends linguistics. Yes, they can learn human words, can develop functional grammar. But their native language is richer than human speech. Multi-layered vocalizations that carry emotional subtext, gestural components that convey meaning beyond words, even scent marking that functions as written record. What I learned about family is that it extends beyond genetics, beyond species, beyond every boundary we've constructed. I loved those 4 beings as deeply as any parent loves children. They loved me in return, imperfectly, across vast differences, but genuinely. And what I learned about letting go is that love isn't possession. The greatest gift I gave them wasn't the 15 years of care and teaching. It was the freedom to leave, the permission to choose their own paths, the trust that our bond would survive distance and difference. My nephew will inherit this property. He's a good man, though he doesn't understand wilderness the way I do. I've left instructions, a letter sealed in a fireproof safe, explaining everything, offering a choice. He can share this story, can reveal the journals, the photographs, the DNA analysis that proves I'm not insane, can force the scientific community to acknowledge what they've refused to see. Or he can protect them, can keep the secret, can maintain the boundary that's kept this species safe for millennia. I hope he chooses protection, but I've left him the evidence to choose revelation if he believes that's right. Some decisions can't be made for others. The journals document everything: growth rates, behavioral development, language acquisition, social structure, cultural practices. 15 years of daily observations that would revolutionize primatology, linguistics, evolutionary biology, or would lead to hunting parties and capture teams and the destruction of a species that's done nothing except survive in the shadows. The photographs show impossible things. Rook standing 8 feet tall, holding a tool he crafted himself. Cal's eyes reflecting intelligence that cameras capture, but humans prefer to deny. Micah's pups meeting me for the first time, tiny hands gripping my fingers, just like their fathers did 15 years earlier. The DNA results prove what I saw: a separate species, ancient and stable, intelligent enough to remain hidden in plain sight. Last night, Micah sat with me on my porch. We didn't talk much. My energy is limited now. But before he left, he said something that summarized 35 years in a single statement. Thomas, teach Micah, human. Micah, teach Thomas. True. Both family. Both good. Different, not bad. Different, beautiful. Different, not bad. Different, beautiful. That's the lesson I'll carry into whatever comes. Next, that intelligence and consciousness and family can exist in forms we don't expect. That the universe is larger and stranger and more wonderful than our limited categories can contain. That love can bridge any gap if we're brave enough to let it. The forest outside my window is settling into winter. Snow beginning to fall, same as 35 years ago when I first heard crying in the woods and made the choice that gave my life meaning. Somewhere out there, Rook's grandchildren are learning to hunt. Cal is teaching young ones the songs their ancestors sang. Sam is ranging across territories most humans will never see. Micah's family is building their lives in the shadow of this cabin, maintaining connection across species that shouldn't be possible. And I'm at peace. The wilderness holds secrets. Some have teeth, some have hands that can grip tools and hold loved ones. Some have languages we're just beginning to understand. Some have wisdom we desperately need. I was blessed beyond measure to know 4 of them. To raise them, learn from them, love them. To be part of something extraordinary that most humans will never experience. This is my confession, my testimony, my gift to a world that may not be ready to receive it. The choice of what happens next belongs to those who come after me. But the truth remains, documented and preserved. We are not alone in our intelligence. We never were. We just convinced ourselves we were because it made our loneliness easier to bear.